Hello YouTube, this is VistaBuntu. Today we're going to be playing Kerbal Space Program and exploring what's called parts clipping. Now that's something that I have known about for a while, but not really realized how much it could be abused for fun. Obviously, a lot of people might say it's cheating to use it, and you can use it for cheating quite a bit, but given that this is a sandbox game, the definition of cheating really depends on your own rules that you put in place for your own gameplay experience. So, with that in mind, I'm just going to be messing around. I don't really have anything planned out, aside from pushing part clipping, pushing the limits of what can be done with it, and just having fun. So, yeah, I guess let's get started then. Now, I'm using the space plane hangar. I could use the VAB and launch off the launch pad. But recently, like this one here, for example, I've just, instead of putting launch equipment like wheels on my crafts, I've just been throwing parachutes on them and launching them vertically, even though they're planes. So, in this one, for example, this was just the other day when I had, obviously I was not unfamiliar with the snapping here. You can go up to 10, and then you can do that 3 times at the default snap interval, and you can get a total of, for example here, 30 tail fins easily placed on some round surface. But what I hadn't really played around with much was the tools up here to move parts very carefully. So like selecting a part here and then clicking and dragging, clicking on one of these arrows on the vertical or X and Z axes to move the part very gradually in any direction. And here I'm holding shift to move it by a smaller amount. But you see the one over here moves too because these parts were placed with symmetry turned on to mirror across the center of the ship. So that's why they do that. But by using the move tool and having all of my parts moved using that, they will snap to specific offsets, and that allows it to be, that allows the parts to be lined up really nicely. You don't have any like that are just kind of carefully set but not quite in line with the ones near them. So that's how I got all these lined up perfectly the way they are. And long-term KSP players, this stuff is just old news, and if that's the case, feel free to hang around and watch, maybe enjoy it, but for any more casual players like myself, this might be a little bit more interesting or educational. So yeah, the offsets though, what I had not tried to do with them before was to put multiple wings on the same round surface, all parallel to each other, because that was kind of a challenge. Because when you try to place something on a round surface, and I've been kind of limiting myself by tech tier, because I have a campaign going in a non-sandbox, and I want to test things out with the limitations of the tech tier I have unlocked in that campaign. So I haven't really been going above tech tier 4 here, and I probably won't in this this video today. But so normally with a round surface, when you're using like any symmetry, like the cycle, oh, it's out here, radial. So if you're using like radial and putting 2 or more, or if you're using reflection and putting just 2 things, regardless, when you're doing that on a round surface, trying to place them trying to place multiple of the same part parallel to each other, but not on opposite sides, you can't really do it on a round surface, because what happens is you'll try to place one here, and here it's perfectly opposite from the other one. They're both parallel to each other on opposite sides. But when you try to place another one, you're going to be angled and not parallel to that one that was there. And if you try to place it in exactly the same spot to be parallel, it's going to overlap it. And you can't place it in the exact same spot as the one that's there already, because what will happen is it will start snapping onto that one that was already placed. And same thing on the opposite side. So you can overcome that problem though if you use the move tool here and you select one of these and you drag it off to a side, and then you place the next one, and it's doing this annoying 8 times rotational snap thing because I moused over one of these and it reset that. So 2. Okay. So now I have these ones, the old ones and the new ones, parallel to each other. They're not in exactly the same spot, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this one shift up a little bit. And again, I'm holding shift while I do that. Not sure if I got this one lined up that way. Close enough. I'll get them lined up better when I move them closer to each other. Yeah, so it still needs to be shifted slightly. Huh. Oh, maybe they're backwards? Nope. They're in exactly the same spot, it was just perspective. Okay. So yeah, if you wanted to have them offset like these ones, that's all you would do, and you'd repeat that process a couple more times to get, for example, 4 swept wings all parallel to each other, and then 3 control surfaces sandwiched in between. But none of this involves parts clipping. This is just showing the use of the move tool. Parts clipping though, that's where things get a little more interesting. So these parts are slightly clipped into each other, and so there's really no space for air to flow between them, but they still work perfectly fine. And once I had realized that, I decided to play with something else. Yeah, don't save. And made this little guy. Terribly ugly. I don't care. It was a test, mostly, because I had also become a little more familiar with these 3 overlays recently, and wanted to make something that was really quite ugly, but also had a lot of capability for flight and ease of control while flying it. And this thing is very easy to control while flying. It can get to a good speed. I mean, obviously not 24,000 meters per second speed, because you've got atmosphere and other things. But using just these Juno engines and a single big fuel tank in the middle plus the 3 small ones below, and having only 2 wings that are going to be parallel to the ground, perfectly parallel to the ground while flying it, the other ones here at 45-degree angles offset from the ground, so they're not as effective in giving lift while flying it, but they still contribute to that. And then you've got these vertical ones that do nothing for lift while in flight, but while you're rolling to a side, for example, and if this is your parallel to the ground, then you have other wings here that are giving you lift. So no matter what, you can roll in any amount with this craft and you're still getting roughly the same amount of lift regardless of your roll, which makes it interesting to control. And having these elevons on each of the little wing segments, that allows for any like direction of adjustment to its movement. And using the Mark I cockpit, it has built-in where is it? It has built-in reaction wheel, like really any cockpit. So using the reaction wheel and the elevons, you have all the control you need as long as your centers of mass and thrust, etc., are lined up pretty well. And you can control the craft in flight without really having to worry much about it. And this one does land with parachutes perfectly fine if you like slow down enough as you approach. But yeah, the clipping though, that was kind of that was something that I noticed more as I played around with this particular craft. So when you're trying to place the Juno engine and the air intake, you can't really place it in any random spot. It needs to have a little node on it, like the green and black plus thing here, checkerboard thing. But there aren't any on like wing segments or whatever. There are on like structural fuselage, which this is the wrong direction for the intake. But if I want to put, yeah, turn that off. If I want to put one of these, just whatever, and I want to put like, is it clipping to the other side now? Whatever, I'll just stick it here. So if I want to put the air intake on something, it needs to A, be connected to your craft, of course, and B, have one of those checkerboard nodes. And I didn't really like that restriction because it meant that I needed like a fuselage piece attached to my cockpit. And then on each end of the fuselage, you would have like an air intake and your Juno basic jet engine. And that's all well and good, but I didn't want to have all of that mass offset from the very center of my craft. I wanted to try something new, so if you go here, you've got your modular girder segments, and they're normally placed like with one of your checkerboard node things attached to the surface that you're putting the girder segment on, and then on the other end of it you have another one of those attachment things, and the air intake attaches to, well, I'll just do the other end of it. It's annoying. But basically that's what I did here. I think this will be easier if I rotate the whole craft back to normal. Alright. Yeah, so that might have been what was going on. I'm going to put another one of these on it just to show, I guess, what I'm talking about. So it does that, and if you use the rotate tool on it, you can make some better placements given what direction you're trying to travel with your craft. So if you're trying to travel in this direction, facing directly away from the camera here, then the modular girder segment isn't really helpful in some cases. So instead of using it in its default orientation when it attaches to your craft, you can rotate it to be in this orientation, which, oh great, which allows you to place your air intake, for example, on that end and your engine there. And that's all well and good. It looks weird, but it works. And you don't have your fuel in between them, so you don't have that extra mass hanging out here. So your reaction wheel would be more effective. And, well, anything that rotates your craft would be more effective because your mass won't be all out on the edges of your craft. But you can have a little bit more fun with this if you use parts clipping, more than I already have, because you see this wings in general, anytime you attach wings, part of it needs to clip into the craft. It doesn't need to, but it does by default. And if you want it to look decent, you move your wings slightly closer into the fuselage anyway. But you can have, for example, these two things clipped into the modular girder segment, as I've done here. And unfortunately, you can no longer access them after you do that. But to get them in there, it's easy enough. You use the move tool, you select your part, and then you do that. And on the other side also, there's a maximum that they can move, I think. I guess not. There was a maximum that one of these over here was able to move. Might have been some other thing going on. But yeah, so basically you can move the entire air intake and engine into your modular girder segment, and then just move your girder segment anywhere that you want it to be. And as you can, whoops, I'm holding shift while right clicking and dragging, and that's not good. And as you can see, it allows you to compactly put those things inside of the segments. The reason I did this initially was not just to experiment with clipping. It was actually because I was trying to get my centers of mass and thrust and everything closer together. And so I was moving, for example, the engine, which it's not heavy by any standard, but it's not light, and I wanted to use its contribution to the overall center of mass to shift that into a better spot. And so in doing that, I was able to make these nice little air intake and engine pods, and they work nicely. I mean, they're ugly as hell, but it works. So I'm gonna get rid of that. So that got me thinking, after I stopped playing Kerbal Space Program the other day, that got me thinking about the potential of doing this parts clipping, because over here, when I was actually initially getting this ship built, I had these slightly further apart, and you can see that they're not clipping into each other when you do that, but at the same time they're not touching the ship, the center of the ship, which I feel like that would be quite a bad thing if you try to launch this ship right now. I think the engines would take off on their own and leave the center of the ship on its own. And now that I just realized that, I'm going to test that, because that'd be fun. So let's see what happens, actually. It won't have fuel. It says it will, but let's see. This will be interesting. Oh, I need to make it vertical first. Well, I mean, it's not like acting like they're not attached, so I guess it would still work. But it would still need to be vertical, so first thing first, rotate this. Now you can see this ugly thing fly. Alright, turn on SAS so this thing that's standing on a needle point doesn't fall over. Get the throttle all the way up. 8 engines starting up now. Might look like it's not going to do anything, but then it starts doing something, and it's beautiful, magical. Let it build up some speed. So actually, yeah, it didn't fall off. It's still magically attached, even though they're not visually attached. I'm not really okay with that, but I mean, that's how it works, so. Yeah, so now that I've tested that, I can get this thing to fly. And it's not super stable, like it's gonna wobble once you make adjustments. It's gonna sink a little bit because it doesn't have a huge amount of lift each time you make an adjustment. But if you get it with a little bit of an angle upward, then it'll offset whatever drop there would be due to the lack of lift. And you see it's getting up to about 300 meters per second here, which is about the speed of sound, I think. So I mean, it's not slow for an aircraft. And there's no part clipping or anything. It's just, you know, putting the engine pieces creatively in the right spots and throwing wing segments on radially. Magically seems to have enough lift to keep this thing flying. It's pretty awesome. It can't do anything major as far as maneuvers go. Like if you try to go vertical, well, A, it's using the Juno engines, so they're not very strong in the first place, but it means that they require oxygen. So, whoa. Normal should not be doing that. Wait, I did the wrong one, didn't I? Radial out. Yeah, I'm new to the, to using these things, actually, so ignore that. But yeah, since it is using the Juno engines, it's about to start getting less power from its engines. And that's why it's slowing down. And it'll continue slowing down now that it's in this lighter atmosphere. But it can still get up pretty high for being such a cheap little toy. Yeah, cool. So that's that. But what I realized, and what I'm excited to try, is using this move thing. Is that highlighting the... yeah, it is, okay. To get all of these more compactly into a craft that's able to fly. Because I don't know what Kerbal Space Program will do. Obviously you can't pick these pieces up and use them anymore once they're inside of that part. And since they're attached to that part, you can't just move that part out of the way. Unless you reroute, maybe, I don't know. But I think, given that that was a craft that was, you know, flyable, that this should be also something that flies just fine, and the wings won't be sticking out as far. That might influence some things. But if I get all of these to the very center of the craft, at least as far as radially center goes, that looks like radial center. Now I'm going to no longer be able to touch them, but this thing should fly. and it'll be interesting to see this. So almost made that same mistake again of trying to fly it without rotating it vertically. So let's see what happens. So parts clipping, you get enormous possibilities from. You can stick fuel tanks inside fuel tanks, as I've seen people talking about when I looked up parts clipping before this video. And that's clearly very cheaty. So is right here putting engines inside your fuel tank, and air intake inside your fuel tank. None of that in any way should be possible physically, but given that this is sandbox and I like experimenting with this stuff, it is something I'm going to try. So let's see what happens. I mean, it's blowing the air out somewhere, so it should take off in a moment. Unless it explodes. It might very well explode. It might be detecting that there's something directly on the opposite side of the engine, which might be impacting its ability to push the air out. But visually, of course, you're seeing it push air, but the question is it in the physics side of things, treating it as if there's the airflow needed to move this craft upward? I mean, it's wobbling, it's like trying really hard, but it's not going. It went before. The only difference was those parts were outside of this fuel tank instead of inside of it. So, I don't think you can put engine parts inside of other parts and have the craft still fly right. Okay, so back to the hangar. Rotate this back to regular. I mean, now that I can't touch those things because they're inside there, I should have probably made a new save before I did that, but I mean, it's not really any different from... Which one was that? Test. It's not really different from this one, so I'm going to make a new save off this one. Get rid of that one I just messed with. Okay, so maybe they'll still work inside of the fuel tank if they don't all overlap each other, because that might reduce the effectiveness of each engine, at least as far as the game computes things. It might reduce the effectiveness of them based off of how much they're individually exposed to outside air or space, compared to other engines around them. So like if you have like, how do I do this? If you have just going to throw something over here for demonstration purposes. If you have something like this, where these parts are overlapping each other somewhat, and each of them has like an air intake on them and an engine. Oh, this is annoying. I'd have to rotate the whole craft to make it work. Okay, yeah, now it's getting it. Now I'm not going to make a craft with 8 pods of 8 engines off at the end of the wings. Maybe later, but not right now. So I'm setting this up though to show that if you had something radially around here, and you used this. Oh, this is I'm gonna move this up to here so that they're all parallel to the ground. Oh. Oh my god. Well, I mean, it's made already, so I might give it a try. 45 tons. This was not my intention, but here we go. Wait, one last check. Thrust is too far back. Oh, that's partly why I compressed the engine and air intake. It's because the center of mass versus where the thrust was, it was hard to separate those when I had the fuel in between the air intake and the engine, because you'd have to throw it way up here. Like, yeah, it's not good. So, well, we've already gone this far. So, do that. Well, I can't touch those engines in there anymore. But this is decent. I mean, it should fly and be relatively controllable. The engines are all inside of these fuel tanks, so that might be a problem. Part of the wings are covered, which might be a problem. Controlling the thing with the elevons might be a problem, because it's now 45 tons. But let's give it a try. Oh my god, this thing is ugly. Turning SAS on immediately. Done. Throttle all the way up. Putting this on radial out. And lift off. Oh my god, the frame rate. And it is taking off just fine. I mean, I wouldn't have expected any less with 72 engines. So yeah, this thing is flying. It rotates just fine. Has a lot of whoa, that was. Yeah, this is what happens when you don't have much lift surface and control surface, and you have this much mass. I'm gonna have it go horizontal here for a moment. Come on, you can do it. I don't want it to get too high. It's already in the lighter atmosphere. I don't want it to dip down too much because it's going to start controlling that dip way too much. It doesn't have enough lift to offset that. I might have gone too far down. It might not be recoverable. It's at max thrust, and it continues going down every time it bobs like that. Yeah, I can't say I didn't expect this from something that looks like this, but at least it took off, and now it's going about 500 meters per second, which, I mean, that's not low, but it's going to crash into the ocean very soon. Or, no, not the ocean, it can't go over there. I don't have that much control yet. Wow, those rings, cool. Yeah, so I'm not going to spare you from the crash. I usually do spare myself from the crash, but heck, why not? I'm still going to try saving this thing. That was me trying to use the parachutes. Not going to happen. Still worth an attempt, but I'm going 500 meters per second. They're not going to open. Yeah, it's going to crash. Goodbye, Valentina. There's some grass. Whoa, something. Whoa! Still some pieces breaking. Why do I still hear it over here? Huh, okay. Back to the hangar. Yeah, so that was obviously not going to be an effective craft. You can't have that much mass off from the center without much control surface or lift. So yeah, these are going away. And rotate this back. But anyway, I got a little sidetracked there. I was going to explain why having those all in the very center of the craft might not be working, but why having them slightly away from the center might still work. So I'm going to give that a try. So now each of the engines is fully inside the fuselage, but they're not fully overlapping each other. So this thing might still fly if I make it vertical. So let's see. And if this still doesn't work, then it must be taking into account that the engines are completely enclosed. We'll know in a matter of seconds. And maybe it's a lack of air intake, because if you are pulling in air from a smaller region into multiple air intakes, it might not have enough air to pull into each of them, compared to if those air intakes are spread out more. So that might be what's going on here. Not just the engines pushing into a solid surface, it might be actually the air intakes not having enough open space around each air intake to pull in the air effectively. So yeah, that's not gonna fly. The good news is I can still select those support pieces, so I should be able to fix that. Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's see if it takes off easier. I want to see how far this invisible connection thing actually goes. Like, am I able to take off if these pieces are way out here? Will it work? I know there's like limits on the build, depending how upgraded your launch area is. This one actually doesn't have any limitations. I mean, it's sandbox, so apparently fully upgraded launch area is going to not have limitations. Cool. So yeah, the reaction wheel in this thing will be seriously underpowered, I think, if this thing takes off. But the elevons, given how far away they are, they should be able to work better, I think, at controlling the craft. So, going to give this a try. Rotate this thing. Let's see. I mean, if you can have parts floating this far away, invisibly. Oh my god, nope. Yeah, that doesn't work, I guess. So there's an acceptable amount of space these things can have between them and other parts. Invisible space still being connected to those parts. Because they were able to get fuel too, so it's treating it like it was an actual connection even though they were not visibly connected before. So I'm going to decrease that distance. To about here. 11, so under 12 meters across. We'll see if that works. I mean, it hasn't blown up yet, so maybe this distance here, because it was 12 meters all the way across, which would mean that to the surface of your center object would be about 5.5 meters, and then about half of that would be around the middle of the engine, or the left side here. So from the surface there to that might be about 5 meters. So 5 meters of open air might be completely okay as far as Kerbal Space Program's rules are concerned for allowing fuel to go across and allowing parts to stay in place without blowing up or falling apart. So let's at least try to launch this. I mean, they've got fuel, and it should take off in a moment because none of these engines are inside the actual fuel tank anymore. Oh, it'd help if I gave it some throttle. Now, since these are farther apart, there might be more wobble of some kind, like oscillating as the flight as the craft flies. It doesn't seem to have any problem though. And I can rotate this thing. Now that the parts are farther away from the center, it does kind of have a little bit more momentum when I rotate. So that could be a problem controlling it later on. But, I mean, it's flight worthy, so I'll let this thing get a little bit higher, and I'll try flying it around a little bit, and see how it performs more parallel to the ground. It's a lot less wobbly than when the wing pieces were close to the fuel tank, so that's a positive thing. As you can see, the distance between the prograde marker and the ship's actual attitude, I think is the term. The difference between those shows that it needs to be angled higher than that marker, substantially higher than that marker in order to stay in flight, and not lose altitude continuously. I mean, that marker itself needs to be above or at horizon for that to happen, but in order for that to be the case, the ship's attitude needs to be even higher, about 10 degrees higher it looks like. So, I mean, that's not ideal, but it's not terrible. I think the version before that had them actually attached to the ship, I think it required an even higher inclination. So, I don't think I've gone over these mountains. But yeah, so it's in flight, just fine. I'm not in the upper altitude yet, or upper atmosphere. I'm gonna try bringing this back to Kerbal Space Program launch grounds. So this is me trying to yaw without tail fin, but because I have, you know, I guess the vertical components of this, even at the front of the craft, it's still possible even though I'm losing some altitude. I don't think you can do that without losing altitude anyway in any craft. So I don't think this one is particularly bad at yawing. But I do need to oscillate it quite a bit to change its inclination here, its pitch. So here's yaw again. I'm just going to do the roll and roll and pitch to turn. Beautiful. Now this is one that doesn't have any part clipping except for making the engine pieces inside of the actual modular girders, which realistically could be done. The only thing that is kind of not okay about this craft is the glaring issue of physical connections between the fuel tanks and these wing segments and engines. That's obviously not normal, but everything else here is perfectly fine. It makes it a perfectly flyable craft without like going all cheaty. So it's interesting. So I could actually go back to the spaceplane hangar and, if I really wanted to, put those connecting cables between the fuel tank and these girders and make this a legitimate, not cheaty craft. But as it stands, there's no game breaking part clipping going on here. Alright, so let's try landing this thing. And by landing, I mean using parachutes, because I'm not going to actually try landing anything. I'm not good enough to land anything horizontally. And I know that I don't need to spiral in order to land. I just kind of enjoy doing that. So this is going to take about another minute and a half to get to the surface if I continue at this rate. But I'm losing surface speed, so it should start pitching down a little bit faster. So it might take about a minute from now. But I'm going to open the parachute well before that. I mean, I could open it right now. Probably, yeah, I could. Beautiful. I want to see if I can get it on the runway at least. Not required at all, but it's still kind of a fun thing to target. Yep, here's the pitching. Because it seriously does not have enough power. Well, I'm close to the runway. I don't think I'm going to land on it. Because it lost way too much horizontal speed. This is good enough though. At least I can still rotate this thing. I think the wings are actually impeding that, because the reaction wheel I think is what's controlling that right now, since there's not really any airflow over the wings that's going to contribute to it. So it's a pretty slow rotation, but I can still do it. Now that graphical issue, not quite sure why that happens, but whatever. Alright, 10 meters per second, landing successfully. SAS is still on. Beautiful. That's right. My cursor disappeared because I went into internal view and came out. Forgot all about that. So I couldn't actually do anything in here. Yeah, that's not necessary, but I mean it might help if this thing wobbles, I guess, while it's on the ground. I would like for these parachutes not to completely become unusable once you land a craft on the surface. Because I've had crafts that land on the surface and, you know, you can still move them around because of how they're constructed. But you've landed them using parachutes and you should be able to repack those parachutes and move the craft around and then take off again and use your parachute again. Maybe there's a way to do that, but this is vanilla Kerbal Space Program. I didn't mention that, but no mods on here, just stock parts up to tech level 4 for my current gameplay. So yeah, now will she die if she does an EVA? And let's go. I mean, this is about 10 meters, since the wingspan is 12-ish. So yeah, I think 10 meters, I mean it shouldn't kill a person, but it's dangerous, so. They always look like they die when they land on the ground though, so. She didn't die. Lovely. Well, now she can't get in though, so there's that problem. Jetpack. If I remembered the hotkey for that, I would use that. But let's see if she can kick this thing over. Turned off SAS. Wait a second. Oh, no electric charge, so it turned off on its own. the jet engines give it electric charge to control the reaction wheel and such. Alright, so she might be able to kick this thing over, because it's not very stable at the base. Let's give it a try. I mean, it's a little wobbly, but I don't think she can do it quickly enough to repeatedly knock into it and kick it over. No, it's a little wobbly, but I mean, I guess it's stable enough with that flat base. Cool. Well, I'm gonna wrap up the video there. I want to do another one on clipping. I really want to see if I can find a very compact ship. Obviously you can throw a million fuel tanks into the space of one and make a ship that has tons of wings in the space of two, you know, and kind of just totally break things. But I really want to try to make the smallest thing I can that is still flyable using the part clipping, I don't want to call it a mechanic. Basically, by making parts share the same space, I don't just want to make the most overpowered craft, I want to actually try to make something that is as condensed as possible yet still flies. And I know I said I want to wrap up the video there, but to give an example, this thing was an earlier little test that I made. Not amazing by any means, and not optimized, but it actually flies, and actually it didn't have a rear landing gear when I got it to fly the first time. So I was actually trying here with no part clipping to get the most compact, flyable, horizontally flyable craft that I could find, that I could make using parts at the low tech tiers. Smallest weight, smallest, I mean it's less than 1 ton. Probably closer to 1 ton when you have a Kerbal on it, but it flew just fine. And as you see, it has, given its small weight, even with just 1 fuel tank, it has loads of delta V. So with that in mind, I mean I added the tail thing here because it made it actually repeatedly possible to launch this thing without it burning into a fireball 9 out of 10 times. But with part clipping, I imagine I could make this type of thing even more compact at an even smaller mass and still be a usable flyable craft. So that'll be a fun thing to try during the next episode. So yeah, that was the episode on part clipping. It's been fun. I'll see you guys next time.